This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast, a special Breeders' Cup Week Halloween edition. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal, show 281, I believe, October 31st, 2017. Getting ready to head out to San Diego myself in the Brooklyn bunker right now. Co-host Jonathan Kinchin was meant to join in, but he ends up on an airplane as per usual, but he will be back in San Diego for the festivities. Joining me in his stead, two very special guests. First of all, returning to the podcast, he's an award-winning broadcaster. You know and love his work that he does for the Breeders' Cup, for NBC Sports, for Racing UK. He is, of course, Nick Luck. Nick, how are you this morning?
Peter, I'm very well, although I am standing in what I can confirm is rain at Del Mar.
Maybe Kinchin's flight got delayed, because we all know he is the ultimate weather jinx. He's the only race in the last 2 decades that was taken off the turf in Del Mar summer was when he was there. He's gotten the whole card rained out at Santa Anita before. Blizzards, hailstorms, locusts, what have you. JK tends to bring the adverse weather conditions. But hopefully, I assume, Nick, things will be dried up in time for Friday. Is this a passing little mist? What's going on?
I hope so. Yeah, no, I think it'll be okay at the weekend. But, listen, it's good. It's great to be here. It's very pleasant.
Excellent. We also have on the show for the first time a guest I've wanted to have for quite a while. Folks who are listening are very familiar with the work of Marcus Hirsch for Daily Racing Form, who ably covers both foreign racing and domestic racing. The man we have on the line now is his opposite number at the Racing Post. He's Ron Wood. Ron, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Peter. Not bad. Yeah, doing well.
Out
good
in San Diego already? How are things looking out there for you?
Yeah, I'm up in La Jolla at the moment, and it's as Nick described. It's pretty overcast and a bit wet. I went out for a run earlier this morning, and the roads are soaked. I think there'd been a little bit of rain, but hopefully it will clear up. The sun was starting to come through, but it hasn't done yet. So
hopefully, I'm sure it's San Diego. Everything will be wonderful in a few hours. That's typically how it tends to work out there, from my experience. Nick, we only have you for about half the show today, so I want to dive right in, and I want to take a quick look at the relevant races from a European participant perspective, and then in the second half of the show, Ron and I will dig deep on some of the questions surrounding these horses. But first and foremost, I'd like to talk about the first Breeders' Cup race happening on Friday. It is the BC Philly Juvenile Turf. This is a record where the USA, and specifically Chad Brown, having won 3 runnings of it, have a fantastic record. And historically, the European runners have underperformed, I think it's safe to say. Do you see that trend continuing this time around, or do you feel like it's just a matter of time before we see Aidan O'Brien in the Juvenile Phillies Turf winner circle?
It's probably only a matter of time before we see him win the Juvenile Phillies Turf, and you could argue that this is the strongest contingent yet, with Happily in September. I'm sure Ron would agree with that. They're both bona fide Group 1 performers back home. Happily beat the Colts in a Group 1 for all it wasn't the strongest edition of the Jean-Luc Lagardère at Chantilly. And September should have won the Phillies Mile. She got stuck in traffic late and only went down by a nose. She's quite small, quite handy, and likes a firm surface. So for all she might not be quite as inherently talented as Happily, she will be very well suited by the conditions. So I think he'll be pretty disappointed if he can't make a significant impact here. But yeah, as you point out, we've said that before with European horses. Fillies at this time of year, you're never quite sure whether they're going to bloom or whether they've had enough for the year. Both these fillies have had long enough seasons.
Fair enough. Ron, what's your perspective? Do you see these Aidan O'Brien runners as the ones to beat here, and how would you go about separating them?
Yeah, I think so. I certainly think they're the form horses. All I would say is that I was kind of hoping O'Brien would bring Clemmy over, who's Churchill's sister. I mean, I think she's been the real standout 2-year-old as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, I don't know about the ratings. I think she's top. For me, she was the best 2-year-old filly in Europe. So it'd been good to see her, and there was talk of that. So then my only sort of slight hesitation about taking too short a price about either of these two would be, well, in my opinion, and I think the general opinion is that maybe they aren't quite his best. So that's the only sort of slight hesitation. And he has had a few beaten in this. I think Qualify, who went and won our Oaks, she ran down the field in this. So I don't know. I haven't made my mind up on the race yet, but that's my only sort of slight reservation about jumping in at too short on, say, obviously Happily is going to be short with Ryan Moore up as the first string from a handy draw. I'm not committing just yet at the moment. And there are some other interesting ones in there. His son Joseph's got Now You're Talking in there. That ran quite a nice race off a break behind Clemmy. He finished fourth in a Group 1 back home, the Cheveley Park, 6 furlongs. The question for her would be whether she can get the trip. But I don't know. I think you're going to want a bit of speed round here. I certainly wouldn't want a horse who's going to end up being a middle distance horse. I think I'm going to be looking for something that's got a bit of a nippy type, basically. That's that's got a good bit of European form maybe, and could just offer a bit of value at a bigger price. And so certainly Now You're Talking for Joseph O'Brien, the one that was fourth behind Clemmy in the Cheveley Park. She's interesting. And Madeline for Roger Varian also got a handy draw. She was third in the Cheveley Park, just ahead of Now You're Talking. And it was interesting. Roger Varian said afterwards that she's not very big either, and they're trying to make the most of her this year. So hence the reason she's out here. Again, the trip's a question mark, but she's a nippy, speedy type, handy draw, might just travel around. And I don't know. I'm undecided on the race, but that's the way I'm looking at it at the moment, I think.
Some long shot possibilities. We'll come back later in the show, Ron, and talk a little bit more about that form from the Cheveley Park. But let's move on, for the purposes of time, to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, a race where the foreign contingent has had a lot more success. Ron, we'll keep it with you this time. Who are the runners in here you have an eye on, and is there anyone you've had a bet on already?
I'm just opening the race. No, I haven't had a bet in this yet. I don't know. I find this quite a tricky race because Mendelssohn is the O'Brien horse, and I'd have liked him to have gone in the dirt race just because of his pedigree, and he's a half-to beholder, and he'd have been interested in that. So again, I'm not sure about him on the turf. And Beckford is a horse from Ireland whose trainer's predominantly a jumps trainer, but he's been a really speedy 2-year-old back in Europe. And again, I don't know, I'm sort of repeating myself from the fillies race, but I'm going to look for that sort of angle, the speedy type. So James Garfield, who's a good sprinting 2-year-old back in England, he's won a Group 2, 6 furlongs. Beckford's got a lot of speed. I'm going to be looking at that sort of approach rather. Charlie Appleby's horse Mazar, he looks to me like he's going to want a bit of a trip next year, a mile 2, maybe even a mile and a half. So even though Charlie Appleby's won the race and I respect him out here, I'm not necessarily, again, like I said in the fillies race, I'm looking for something with speed. And the two that sort of stand out at the moment are Beckford and James Garfield, and then you just sort of hope they get a clean run round. And I don't think these races are going to be a great test of stamina. Personally, I think Wesley Ward won it with Hootenanny, didn't he, around Santa Anita, and he was essentially a sprinter. That's off the top of my head. I think that was right.
Yeah, firm ground, tight 2 turns. Sometimes that does lend itself to a sprinter being able to go farther. Always tricky to balance the speed and stamina pieces of the equation when looking at these shippers. Nick, how do you see the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf from here? Are you far enough along in your work that you have a selection in the race, or do you have an overview of the field?
I concur with Ron as regards James Garfield's chances. I like him. He's been pointed at the race for a long time, which I like. It's not an afterthought by any stretch of the imagination. I think his win in the Mill Reef Stakes at Newbury entitled him to have a go at the Dewhurst. In fact, so Connections decided to skip that and come here. And he put up an unbelievably good time on that occasion. He beat a very, very honourable runner-up in a horse called Invincible Army, whose form ties in with most of the good juvenile colts this year. I don't think he'll have any problem getting the mile on the turf around here. He's a horse with that nice combination of speed, but also an ability to settle off a strong pace. And with a reasonable draw and Frankie Dettori on board, I think he's got an awful lot in his favour. I saw him in the quarantine barn the other day, and he doesn't look to have gone in his coat. He looks in good condition, as I say, because he's been pointed at the race for a long time and he's been trained backwards from it. I think that speaks volumes as regards his chance, and that's notwithstanding the fact that I think he's got a very good form chance anyway. So that combination of speed and stamina you were talking about, I think he fits this race just perfectly. I also agree with Ron. I don't want to spend half an hour agreeing with everything, but I would have liked to see Mendelssohn, US Navy Flag in the opposite races. US Navy Flag won his Dewhurst by killing off the opposition for speed and a good tactical ride in the mid part of the race. And the split times tell you that really he was only staying on at the one pace late on. I'm not convinced he's a horse that wants to step up in distance to a mile particularly. I would rather have seen him in this rather than the dirt race, which is going to be a more exacting test of stamina. And as for Mendelssohn, well, if he's too inexperienced to run in the dirt race, I suggest he's too inexperienced to run here either, because I think you've got to be just as streetwise to run around the turf here at Del Mar.
I think that's a fair point, and we're going to dive deeper into that question of Team Coolmore and why they made that decision in the second half of the show. But once again, in the interest of time, let's move it along to Saturday and the Turf Sprint. Nick, do you see this one as a straight match between Marcia and Lady Aurelia?
Do you know, I have absolutely no clue how Marcia is going to adapt to this. Sir Mark Prescott was talking quite negatively about her chances of getting around the bend effectively at the weekend. But the thing to favour is one, that she's had a little spin round Chelmsford to get her ready, and two, that she's reasonably well drawn. Add to that there's ironically enough, given it's 5 furlongs, there's actually a reasonably long run into the bend here to sort themselves out. So, listen, on form, she's got a chance, but it's hard to think that Lady Aurelia won't be better suited by the conditions.
Fair enough. I mean, I feel like watching that tape from Marcia, granted it was on wax and it was a very long time ago, but I thought she ran okay left-handed around a bend early in her career. I actually wasn't worried about that. So that's a very interesting piece of information to share. Ron, how do you see the European contingent in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint?
Yeah, I went through this race yesterday, and Marcia and Lady Aurelia, they look a sort of notch above most of them. But Kotai Glory's an interesting horse. He's very talented. He was third behind them in the Nunthorpe. He's second in the King's Stand last year. He's just a notch below the very best. But you sort of go back to the argument. Don't want to sort of keep repeating myself, but the sort of the tight turns. The horse that gets the split on the day might be the one, and there might be a hard luck story. If you're going to take a short price about Lady Aurelia, anything can go wrong in a sprint. A slightly bad break. Something comes and wipes her out. I don't know. I'd be reluctant to take. I'd have to be absolutely convinced that Lady Aurelia was just going to go out and run a race to take what I think will end up being a really short price. So then you look. I mean, Kotai Glory is 25 to 1. I think I saw in a place something like that. And he's one of those that you were relying on one or two of them not firing. But if he ran really well in Woodbine last time. That was a weak race, and admittedly, but it was 6 furlongs on soft ground. He doesn't want 6 furlongs, and he doesn't want soft ground. And he travelled really well. Finished second, just got outrun by a horse who stays further, I believe. Down to 5 furlongs back down to 5 furlongs on fast ground, with the benefit of a run in North America. I don't know. Again, it's a race. I've only just sort of gone through it the one time yesterday, still to make my mind up. There's plenty of other. I have to look a bit closer at the home team, but he's a talented horse anyway, Kotai Glory. So who knows if things did fall? He's not a reliable horse, but if things fell into place for him, then the ability's there for him to run a nice race.
We've seen it time and time again how these turf sprints can be a laboratory for chaos.
Exactly.
What do you think of Kotai Glory, Nick?
Well, he's the sort of horse that will run an exceptional race in top company at a huge price, and then run a rather disappointing race when he ought to win against lesser rivals. So if you're ever going to bet Kotai Glory, a race like this is probably the race to bet him in, or at least use him in your exotic. Because it's not going to surprise Ron, it's not going to surprise me, it's not going to surprise his trainer Charlie Hills or anyone close to him if he runs off his face in this race. But neither is it going to come as any great surprise if he doesn't show much at all. He's just a very, very hard horse to predict, I think. And he's I was talking to the guy that brought him over the other day, and he said he is a real character. He's got a little bit of the monkey about him. I remember being at Doncaster when he was a 2-year-old, and he would have smashed the 2-year-old track record at Doncaster, except he took a liking to the paddock exit and swerved sharply to the right and dumped his jockey about half a stride from the line. So he's always had it in him, but he's always had quite a talent. So I can see why they're having a roll of the dice, put it that way.
I'd forgotten about that, Nick, but that's a fair point. And when you consider it Del Mar as well, the barns are sort of almost directly behind the winning line, aren't they? Maybe if he spots the where his stable is, maybe he's going to make him run that bit quicker if he wants to head back to his stable.
Everybody just wants to get home.
It's quite an exacting test for Oisin Murphy, his first Breeders' Cup ride. Now he's a jockey that is not short of ability and not short of confidence. But if you were going to design your first ride in a Breeders' Cup, I'm not necessarily sure it would be him.
No, that's true. That's fair enough. All I would say is, on that point, I completely take your point. Oisin Murphy gave us a really good ride in defeat around Woodbine. I don't know if he'd ridden around Woodbine before, but I was quite impressed with him. I mean, I think I tipped him in the paper that day and had a bet on him, and it...
He's just not fazed by anything. He's just got a lot of self-belief, and I think you look at a young rider like that who's won a couple of his first couple of Group 1s in the last month, all the confidence in the world, nothing to lose. One thing he doesn't lack is bravery, and it's immediately at home on foreign soil, which is not something you can say about every jockey who comes and rides internationally. So it'll be fascinating to see how that horse gets on.
All right, let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. I was all excited about betting Rhododendron in this spot. I was attracted to the narrative about the bleeding issues she'd had and thinking Lasix would be an improvement for her. And I thought she had some hidden trouble, not even so hidden, but just some trouble in the races leading into this. And then she goes and draws the 14 pole, not where you want to be on the Del Mar turf with that extra little dog leg of a bend. Ron, should I still be thinking about backing Rhododendron in this spot? Can she overcome the difficult post?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I went through this race yesterday before the post position draw, and I did like her chance. I wasn't necessarily going to be my top selection, but yeah, I mean, her form is very strong. Group 1 winner last year. I mean, we know her form that was second in a Guineas, second in an Oaks, and the Lasix is a big positive. I think she won last time, despite the route she had. She's very talented. But, I don't know, I'm sort of sitting on the fence here. The draw is, you'd like to think maybe the draw is going to add a point to her price and maybe to compensate. It's a tricky one. I try not to get too bogged down with the draw when I'm looking at races. But in this case, it's quite off-putting, isn't it? Because it's straight into a bend, then they're into another bend. And I don't know. It's a competitive enough race to maybe, if you to maybe look for something else. And she's got all the ability, but she's going to need a lot to go her way, isn't she, from there?
Do you have a selection in this race from this far out, Ron, or could you give us an overview of who you see as the key contenders from the European side?
Yeah, sorry. Would you mind just going back to Nick? I'm trying to get the race loaded back up.
Oh, yeah, not a problem at all. Nick,
jump back to me and I'll tell you what else.
Beyond Rhododendron, how are you viewing this foreign contingent for the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf?
I think Queen's Trust will run well again. She would ideally like another furlong. She's not the fastest away, and they did go very fast in the race last year, but she hasn't had her conditions this year. She wants fast ground. She may have improved for Lasix last year. If indeed that was the case, then you could argue that she's going to improve for it again. And she's got one piece of form this season behind all those leading turf horses, Ulysses, Highland Reel and Decorated Knight, that I'm not sure many of the other fillies in this race would be capable of achieving. And she did that under an indifferent ride, I thought, from a long way off the pace and running into a quickening pace going wide at Ascot in the Prince of Wales. So any kind of repeat of that, and her class will see her there or thereabouts. It's just a question of whether she can have the tactical pace to lie up handy. And she's drawn in 10, which is not ideal. So that sort of tempered my confidence a little bit. I think the running of this race at 1 mile and an 8 and the way the post positions panned out, I think it could turn into a Chad Brown benefit. And if it's not Lady Eli, I think it could be Grand Jeté, who hasn't either had the rub of the green or stayed the distance the last couple of times. And I think this is right up her street. If she just sits slightly better than midfield, I think she could have the tactical speed to go really, really well here, because you just know that Lady Eli is going to take a massive chunk out of the market. I mean, she's a backing filly, and she'll be the sentimental choice as well. But Stable's got 3 in the race, and I think Grand Jeté is the interesting other Chad.
I like it. Ron, what do you think?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm back now. The hotel Wi-Fi was letting me down. It's such a competitive race, isn't it? There are a few in there. Going back on the point of Queen's Trust, I'm dead against her, to be honest. She needed every single yard of the trip last year at Santa Anita. I mean, they've run her up to 1.5 miles back home. She's not I think this is essentially you essentially want a miler here. I think you don't want a horse who's a middle distance horse, and for all that she's a strong traveller, Queen's Trust. I don't think she's a miler. Yeah, and I know this is a mile 1, but essentially I'm looking for that type. So, yeah, I mean, that's where else you go. Neswa, Roger Varians, again, she ran in the York Strokes. She wants a bit of a trip. Interestingly, she comes off Lasix, I believe. I don't know whether that means anything. She ran in Lasix last time and now doesn't. Whether she maybe didn't take to it last time or something, I don't know. Wahada's, very talented filly. There's Senga from France. She's headstrong and she wants quick ground. So therefore, so she wants quick ground at a good pace. I mean, she might get a good setup first time Lasix. It's just one of those races where you can. Decita's got a good late kick for for Chad as well. I'm going around in circles in this race, as you can probably tell. It's one of those. But yeah, from my angle, as things stand, to take a view is I'm anti Queen's Trust. I mean, that might come back to haunt me. I just don't see having the speed for this.
I'll pepper you with more specific questions about that this race in the second half of the show. But for now, let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Mile. Nick, we'll send it back to you to make sure that Ron can get on the same page. I know how that works. Sometimes on the history of this podcast, we've had a lot of moments with dodgy hotel Wi-Fi, so I'm fully sympathetic. But Nick, where's your money going to go in the Breeders' Cup Mile, or if it's too early for that question, just give us a way into looking at this one.
I'm not sure is the honest answer, but I don't think I'll have a much more mature view by the time it comes around to the race either. The interesting point here is that Aidan O'Brien's decided to run roly-poly in this race together with Lancaster Bomber, rather than running her in the race that we've just been talking about, the filly and mare turf. I wondered whether he would run both in the filly and mare turf in order to make that race a stronger test at the distance, but he hasn't. He's running roly-poly here, probably in the knowledge that this isn't the strongest looking group of milers assembled. So you can be assured that she'll go forward and try and use her stamina at a mile and her guts at a mile to lead them a merry dance. The big question is, will the best of Ribchester show up? And if the best of Ribchester does show up, then he ought to go pretty close to winning this race. My worry with him is he has a tendency to jump hard into the bridle and run a bit keen early on in his races. And I do worry about that round here. I know he's not going to be short of speed, but you just want a horse to drop his head and settle through the race as well, so he's got enough left for that final kick. Yeah, if the best of him turns up, then he'll go pretty close to winning this. But I think William Buick's got quite an exacting task on his hands, just getting him into a nice relaxed rhythm early on. Of the other Europeans, you could make a case that Lancaster Bomber, who ran well at the Breeders' Cup last year, could run a place. I find it slightly difficult to see him winning, but as I say, it's not the greatest mile I don't think we've seen. So, as I say, it's contingent on all sorts of things. If Ribchester settles, then he's got a great chance. Roly-Poly's going to run her race, but is she quite classy enough? And as I say, I can see Lancaster Bomber getting placed. A bit like Ron in the last race, I feel like I'm going round and round in circles with this one. I think Mark Cassie's horse is worthy world approval, but I don't think he's that good, and I don't think he's been beating particularly strong horses. And the fact that Swedwell was able to win the good race at Keeneland probably tells you something about the quality of that race as well. So I'm struggling with the mile a little bit.
It's tricky. There's a lot of factors. You mentioned before, Nick, about how you liked the idea that in James Garfield's case, the race was clearly circled from a long way out. With Ribchester, it's a bit the opposite of that. A last-minute decision to go, a little more of that classic afterthought European shipper to the Breeders' Cup we've seen in the past. But, of course, a lot of these afterthoughts go ahead and win the race anyway. How much of a negative do you see having that hard race in the QE2 on Champions Day and then coming back so quick for Ribchester?
I think I'd rather he hadn't run there, in truth. But Richard Sahi said he's eaten up well, and I think he was always quite keen to have a go at this, even before the QE2, because I think he knew the way the wind was blowing as regards the ground at Ascot. He has been on the go a long time, though. Don't forget he was running in that Dubai Turf over 9 furlongs at the end of March. I would rather he had a slightly less intense season than he has. But he has won 4 Group 1s over a mile in Europe this year. So yeah, he's a very, very worthy contender.
Ron, what's your view on Ribchester in the Breeders' Cup Mile?
Yeah, I think Nick makes some fair points. It's certainly touching on, remembering that he was in, he ran in Maidan in March. That's something that I'd sort of completely forgotten about. And yeah, I mean, it's a long season, that, isn't it, to start there and still be going into November in Del Mar. The one thing I'd normally be dead against this type, sort of the one where it's an afterthought at the end of a hard season. I just think, well, it's not even up for debate. He's a very, very good horse. He's a top, in my opinion, he's a high class, sort of top class horse, and. I don't. And as Nick said, this isn't a great race. I mean, he could potentially have sort of £5 on the field, really. And I like him as well. I know Nick said that that he needs to drop his head and settle. It's the way I'm approaching these races is to look for something that travels. He might, he's drawn 10. He might be stuck a little bit wide, not settle, and his race is run by the first turn. But if he does just happen to get a bit of cover and just cruise around, because he's a very fast horse. Richard Fahey stresses that all the time, that he doesn't know how to go slow, this horse. But if they go a good pace and he gets some cover, I could just see him absolutely charging around there. I mean, some of these horses that the race has been an afterthought for before, the reason it was an afterthought was because they weren't suitable horses for the race, and then they just chucked them in. This horse, I do believe, is a suitable type for this race. He's fast, and the ground will be fine. So, I don't know. I'm not in a rush to take him on. And certainly, as Nick sort of touched on about whether he'll sort of settle, just looking at the draw for the first time, this probably isn't the plan, or it wasn't going to be the plan. I really don't know. But he's drawn right next to the other Godolphin horse, Home of the Brave, in 9. And Home of the Brave likes to go forward, and Swados is an 8. I mean, I wonder if they look at it, or however you pronounce that horse. I wonder whether they look at it and think, well, Home of the Brave's going to go forward, maybe not the lead, but he's going to go handy to take up his usual sort of spot. Maybe Ribchester can just literally go right behind him and get a trail off him. Both be on it. Both then they both have their chance. Home of the Brave gets to go forward as he likes to, and Ribchester gets a target. I don't know. Maybe I'm making it making it sound easier than it actually is. It's they'll all be vying for position, and it's obviously not an exact science, is it? But that might be an idea. I don't know. So without sort of waffling on too much, I'm not gonna say Ribchester is one to definitely take on, because he's just too talented, and if he does get a good trip, he could just take off in the straight and leave them behind. I'm dead against Roly Poly. I watched her Juvenile Fillies Turf race from last year back again, and I know she's improved since then. She's won 3 Group 1s back in England, in Europe. She was just left behind last year at Santa Anita. Ryan Moore got her in a great position from a wide draw, sat about second or third all the way around in a good spot, and the horses with a turn of foot just cruised past her, and she was flat out. She's a war front, and they're often sort of grinders, and I don't think she's got the gears for this race. I don't give her any shot. I have had 2 small anti-post bets.
I think she's running in the wrong race, Rob.
Yeah, I think so. I think that extra furlong of the filly mare turf would have been perfect for her, because she's a miler who just likes to take a little bit of stoking up. I think this is going to ride like a 7 furlong race, and I don't know. She got left behind last year at Santa Anita. I think she'll get left behind again. The 2 small anti-post bets I've had, they're not necessarily going to be my selections, because I need to go over the race again. But I did have a small bet on Lancaster Bomber. I'm contradicting myself because he's a war front, but he did run well last year, and he ran well in Woodbine from a tricky draw. If he gets a good even run round, he can't quicken. I don't think. I think he just needs a good even run round, and he'll run his race. As Nick said, maybe I'd see him winning, but you can see him in the frame. And the other one was Zelzal from France, because he had a bad draw last time on ground that didn't suit in France, and he was hung wide, and he was off a break then as well, so he was miles below form, but he couldn't. It was so many factors against him that day. I think that was the Foray, I believe, and I think there was a really weird quirk. It was like the first 5, I think, were drawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something like that. And he from a wide draw, he had no chance. It was the same in the Arc. You had to be drawn low on that card. So he could run well. I had a small bet on him anti-post. I like Ballarocks as a horse. He's quirky in my opinion, but he's got a good change of gear if he gets run. It's a really tricky race. I've probably waffled on far too long, but yeah. So I don't know if that helps.
I'll ask you. Definitely some good information in there, and we'll dive back into it in a little bit. Nick, I know you got to go, but before you do, Ron and I will cut. You sort of talked a little bit already about the juvenile. Anyway, let's dive right into the Breeders' Cup Turf. We'll get your thoughts on that, Nick, and then we'll let you go, and then Ron and I will continue dissecting these races for the remainder of the show. What are you thinking about this year's Breeders' Cup Turf?
Well, I've been thinking Ulysses for 12 months really, since he finished 4th at Santa Anita, but I don't think I'm alone in that, and he's definitely an improved horse this year. And if our received wisdom is right, that you need a horse who can excel at a distance shy of the distance advertised on the race card, then Ulysses is a horse who's bound to go well, because he's a smooth travelling horse who's got 2 high-level wins over 10 furlongs. I sort of sense the bandwagon is just slightly not juddering to a halt, but has just eased off a fraction, because he had that run in the Arc that wasn't originally planned, and then they were half thinking about running him on Champions Day as well. But he is very talented. They've been training him up for this race for a year, and I'd be disappointed if he didn't have too much speed. I totally get Highland Reel, and I totally get that he was minded at Ascot, and I totally get that he probably needed that put him spot on for this, and you know what you're going to get with him. He's uncomplicated. He's going to go out there, wear his heart on his sleeve, and run his race. But he's not going to get the sort of trip that he got last year. I'm sure he's not. He can't surely be unpestered by Oscar performance in this race. And I think it could set up for a horse to just come from a little off the speed. I can't see him getting completely his own way again, and I think that's why I give the edge to Ulysses. And I wouldn't entirely forget about Decorated Knight either. The form ties in closely. We know he's a horse with good form over 10 furlongs. And if you want a horse who's going to finish with a good old-fashioned American turf rackle, then it's probably going to be him. So I'd be pretty disappointed if one of the Europeans doesn't win this race, and rather boringly, Ulysses would get my vote.
I'm not boring at all. I hear you. When you get stuck into an idea like that from a long way out, it's usually unwise to get off it as we get closer. Nick, we're going to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and I look forward to seeing you as soon as tomorrow. Cheers.
Cheers, Nick.
Okay.
Cheers, Pete. Take care. Cheers,
Ron, we'll pick up with that very question about and that point that Nick made about the conventional wisdom in this race. I know what Nick is saying, that I've heard people say that you can want a horse whose maybe best distance is short of that of the actual race. But if you go back and look at the European horses who've won the turf, and there have been a lot of them, to me, you don't see a 10-furlong horse in the bunch. They're all real 12-furlong horses. How much do you see that mattering when we examine this year's Breeders' Cup turf?
Yeah, it's a fair point, isn't it? I wonder whether that's because they tend these races, the turf for whatever reason tends to be a good test, so therefore that stamina does maybe come through in this race. I mean, on the point of Ulysses, I went back and watched I know he is an improved sort of horse this year, but I went back and watched that last year's Breeders' Cup turf again, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, if he's going to go a favourite for this race, and you watch that video, you wouldn't touch him, because he was quite one-paced. He was, there were horses that, like Flintshire, made up some ground on Highland Reel. There were horses that made up a little bit of ground on Highland Reel, even though they gave him too much rope. And Ulysses just made no impression. So I don't know. He's an improved horse this year, but he isn't a mile-and-a-half horse. So again, I'm in danger of contradiction, having made the earlier point about looking for a horse with speed. But yeah, as you point out, the turf tends to throw up a sort of a strong staying type. High Chaparral won it twice, and he was a real grinder, wasn't he? So yeah, I mean, and I also think if you're taking a short price about anything, if you're backing any sort of favourite, you want everything to basically be right for the horse, and the trip's enough of a query for me to think there might be something else in there. Cliff Samoa, one of the O'Brien horses, he's got 3 in the O'Brien, and it's easy to forget that horse ran second in the Derby. I mean, and he's 20-1 on the morning line, about the Derby second. And he hasn't had anything go his way since the Derby. He got wiped out in the Eclipse. He's had the ground's been against him a couple of times. He just had a sort of pipe opener the other day at Ascot on bad ground. He's the third string. He's Wayne Lorden. He'd be the third string jockey, although he did win the Guineas for O'Brien this year with 1,000 guineas. But yeah, he's 20-1 in the morning line about a Derby. Horses run well in the Derby. And O'Brien's other one, Seventh Heaven. She ran well in the Filly Mare Turf last year at Santa Anita, which was too short for her, 1.25 miles. She was run off her feet, but she still finished fourth. She's now up to a mile. She's got her conditions. She's 1.5 miles filly, and she wants firm ground. So, she'd be interesting. If you don't mind me continuing, there's there's an interesting thing I thought about Highland Reel. He's a very tough horse, and he takes his racing extremely well. But when he ran second in the or second or third at Ascot the other day, the timer that Found basically did that, didn't she? She ran place in the Champion Stakes at Ascot, and then she won the Breeders' Cup Turf at Keeneland 14 days later. So he's looking to do the same thing, place at Ascot, and then go and win this 14 days later. Whether it means anything or not, but the time of Highland Reel's race compared to Found's race was more than 5 seconds slower. So Highland Reel's race was 5 seconds slower. It was a very windy day, and it was very bad ground. So I mean, to me, unless I've missed something, that suggests that it was a grueling enough race. That's quite a difference in how quick they ran around there. And so that's not an ideal preparation for me. He went into questioning Aidan O'Brien, but he went into the Ascot race off an 84-day break, and I thought, nice run here, and he'll be absolutely fine for the turf. It will set him up perfect. I just wonder whether he might actually have left his Breeders' Cup turf at Ascot because it was a grueling race, and it I don't know. Maybe O'Brien's got this absolutely perfect, but for me, that just nags at me that if you remember the Champions Stakes as well, if anyone saw it, Ryan Moore was the only one who went away to the far side to search for better ground. I mean, he covered a fair amount of ground. It was a proper, for all that you might have looked after him when he was held in the closing stages, the horse still had to run quite hard that day. So whether he can, he is an iron horse, but whether he can bounce back 14 days on, I don't know. I'll look elsewhere, I think. So
it's a fair point. I mean, I'm in his camp because I thought it was definitely notable that he didn't see the stick in the Champion Stakes. It seemed to me, and Moore being the master of that he is, and to me, that race was a difficult workout, but I really feel like they treated it as a workout. But sometimes it doesn't matter what your intention is. Your point's correct, Ron, certainly that if it takes a lot out of them, it might not look like it. It didn't look to me visually, looking at the horse finishing, that it had taken much out of him. But sometimes it's just all about what they do on the clock more than.
You make a good point. I mean, when I was watching the race with someone live, I went to Ascot, and I was surprised that Moore made the move to go we call it going under the trees, searching for better ground at Ascot. I was only surprised, not because it was a bad move, but I went into that race thinking, of course, Highland Real was going there to have every chance of winning. But I went into that race thinking, well, he's going to run a nice race, finish third or fourth, and it'll be the perfect prep. But when I saw Ryan Moore, it was the move Moore made to go under the trees was of a jockey who. They were really prepared to go and win. I think that suggested to me that they thought he was really live in the Champion Stakes.
Interesting. I saw it a little differently. And here's one little data point I'll throw in about Highland Real, who I was looking at on the exchanges and the shops in the morning, and he was as high as 15-1 on the exchange, and he did shorten. Obviously, I think that was people thinking they were getting quote unquote value. But seeing a horse of his talent untouched, I don't know. It just sent me that idea that it was meant to be a public workout.
It's a very fair comment. I might be overanalyzing things. Sometimes you're looking for something that isn't there, and it might be he won the race last year. He's a nice sort of blowout at Ascot, and he's going to go there with a strong chance. I'm possibly in danger of overthinking it, but and it's. Yeah, it's certainly be interesting. He's hard as nails. Another point, again, in danger of overthinking it, he's never run off a 14-day layoff before. The shortest is something like 17 days, and he's run off 19-day layoffs a couple of times. And I think his record's very good. I think he possibly even won a Group 1 this year off like a 19-day rest. But, he has never done the 2-week turnaround. So for all that, we're only talking about a few days. And I do, as I'm saying this, I do think, well, I'm overthinking this because I'm pretty sure Aidan O'Brien knows what he's doing. But but yeah, I don't know. Again, I just think when you get down to the sort of the prices that the likes of Ulysses and Highland Real are going to be, I like everything to be right. So and for me, it just doesn't quite sit that comfortably. What do you think? I don't know any view on Talismanic for Andre Fabre? I mean, you look at this horse.
I'm a little interested in him. I was watching the tape the other day, and this is that kind of horse that my first impression was. This is a real stayer, like obvious talent, real stayer. I don't know, is this maybe going to be too sharp for him? And that's what sent me back to looking at horses like Conduit, who really, to me, had kind of a similar profile. And here we have a chance. I mean, this horse ran well. The form of the Foy hasn't worked out horribly with Cloth of Stars running second in the Arc. I know people aren't. It's not like an Arc people are going to be praising the form of for ages, but I thought he ran well enough. Do you know why Talismanic didn't compete in the Arc? Did you hear the story behind that?
No, I'm afraid not. That's a good point, though. I'm going to look that up because if they specifically targeted this race off of the back of the Foy and they've sort of said, right, okay, we can't. Maybe it's possible that they looked at the Foy and thought, well, we can't win the Arc off the back of that Foy run, but we could win the Breeders' Cup Turf. That could be a good ploy. It's Andre Fabre. I mean, I know maybe Godolphin just wanted to have another runner, but he surely hasn't sent this over just for a holiday. And I mean, you talk about the form of that Foy. It's even better than it looked because Cloth of Stars finished second. I'm not saying he'd have beaten an Abel, but he didn't get much of a run. He was locked up with nowhere to go to the following out, and he ran on really well. So he was quite a good second. And the winner of that race, the German horse, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the name, but I mean that ran sixth in the Arc. And off the back of a really wide trip. I mean, I think that horse was the best of those who were sort of drawn out in the car park that day. So it wasn't a bad Foy. He's a Medaglia Dora as well, this horse, isn't he? So I mean, he's it might be that that's in the back of Farb's mind that get him out to. I'm just double checking that. Yeah, he is. Get him out to America and see how he gets on out there. And possibly from the one, maybe they're gonna. He's a big old galloper. Maybe they're just gonna. Make a good bit of use of him. Keep Highland Reel company, and if Highland Reel runs a bit flat, this thing might just keep on galloping. He can't be here to make up the numbers, can he? Because he's Andre Farb, it just doesn't make sense that he'd be here. Why? They must think he's got a shot of running of surprising a few people, I guess.
I'm interested at a big price. I think there's enough to recommend. I like the fact that he goes on firm. He looks good running round a turn. On the tape. There's a lot to recommend him. Do you think we'll see in the turf run Team O'Brien use some team tactics, not unlike what they did last year? I felt like they really put Javier Castellano on Flincher in an impossible position with Highland Reel there out winging on the lead. And if he decided he wanted to be aggressive and go with Highland Reel or attack Highland Reel early, well, good luck. There's the Arc winner and the winner of the race last year found breathing down your neck. Do you think they could attempt something similar here with a maybe super aggressive ride once again on Highland Reel with the thought of perhaps setting it up for one leg?
It's a really, really good point. I mean, when you put it like that, they played a blinder, didn't they, last year? Because they had exactly as you described. They let the one go off in front, and they let the other one out the back. So yeah, they played it. They played it perfect. And the thing as well about this, the other two, they aren't sort of two horses they just found in the back of the stable that are here just to sort of we might as well just run them. These are good horses. Seventh Heaven won an Irish Oaks and a Yorkshire Oaks last year, and was a good staying on fourth in the filly in Mare Turf last year. She gets her allowance. She's a good filly with her conditions, and you get the impression this has been the plan for a while. She's had a couple of runs on soft ground, ran down the field in the Arc, and obviously we all know that horses who get beaten in the Arc can then go and take the conditioning from that race and go and go and win the turf. Essentially, it's often a good stepping stone. And Cliff Samoa, as I said, second in the Derby. He can't take that form too literally, but Cracksman was third that day, and it's not. I don't know. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. If they send Highland Reel, let him run his race. If something wants to go with him, so be it. And because they've got two real live ones that to race in the mid pack, you'd think. And they're loaded in this race. I'd imagine they're quite confident of coming away with the prize. Yeah, it's.
I'd be nearly certain that Oscar Performance will be ahead of Highland Reel. Coming from that post, I don't think there's anything they're going to. I think they have no choice but to send. If you squint, you can almost see the pieces in place for a potential pace meltdown. If Oscar Performance is to clear, if Highland Reel is being ridden extra aggressively, if Ulysses is going to attack early, and I mean, then all of a sudden, a horse like Talismanic, a horse like Seventh Heaven, they start to become a lot more interesting to me. I'm definitely going to be looking to include them at least, if not bet them on the nose, depending on what the odds are. Did you have any bets in here yet?
I have had a little bit on Seventh Heaven, but I'm undecided as to who I'll be with. Because I'll get Cliff Mower on side as well. They're the two I like as things stand. I mean, what do you think of the way? The more we discuss this, the more I look at it, the more I think the home form, the US form from this year isn't gonna stand up. I mean, Beach Patrol and Fanciful Angel, and I just think that these Europeans are just going to prove a notch up on this standard. I think. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
I would agree. I mean, Beach Patrol is such a cool horse. He's another who could be up there in the vanguard, potentially prompting a meltdown, because he's not going to. He'll try to go and win the race. He's in it to win it. He's a super talented horse, but just on form, I mean, they've got a lot to find. The home team has a lot to find. I wouldn't be able to take the price that Beach Patrol is going to be a great story for the home team and his connections if he could somehow run better than than I think he's going to. But I just feel like this is one year where the European form, as so often happens, is just going to be too strong for the local.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, Fanciful Angel is a good guide. I mean, this horse, Fanciful Angel, has improved since going up in trip and getting Lasix. But the point is, he was a sort of listed standard horse back in England and Dubai. And he's been able to compete quite well in Grade 1s with the likes of Beach Patrol. I mean, that just tells me that this home form is going to get blown out the water by these quality. And as I say, I can't stress enough, these are really good Europeans. You've got the Irish Champion Stakes winner in there. You've got Oaks winners in there. You've got Derby seconds. I wouldn't be looking any further than the Europeans in that race, personally. I know it's probably not saying much, is it, because they're right ahead of the market. But it's just a case of, if you're going to take an angle with you want multiple bets and all that sort of stuff, then I wouldn't entertain the home team, I'm afraid.
For folks listening who have the opportunity to maybe arbitrage between the markets, I think you're going to probably see some differences between the prices on the tote and the prices that would be available at bookies. I know we have a lot of listeners in the UK and Ireland. That's always something to think about in the Breeders' Cup, is shop around to try to get your best price if you have that availability. This might be an interesting race to do that, where you might see a horse like Talismanic possibly going off longer on the tote than the prices you're going to see at the bookie. Just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Let's move on quick to the Breeders' Cup Classic. We can loop back and talk about a few other things after, but I want to make sure that I'm not underrating the O'Brien runners in the Classic. I feel like in an average year, Churchill, a horse I might be a little bit interested in hitting the board or being somewhere at a really big price. But I just feel like this, the opposite of what we were saying in the turf. Here, the home team, some of the form on display, it just seems to me like it's probably going to be way too strong. What's your view?
Yeah, I had to do a comment piece for the Racing Post last week when it was announced that Churchill was entered for this race, and I basically said he's got no chance. So I'm kind of hoping he runs down the field, because otherwise that'll be the last comment piece I write for the paper, I think. I don't know. He's bred along the same lines as Glen Eagles, who couldn't raise a gallop behind American Pharaoh. There's no argument. Churchill's coming into this race in better form and possibly still with more in the tank than Glen Eagles. So maybe that's a bit of an unfair comparison. But he's not bred to run dirt. The only slight angle into Churchill is that he's out of a Stormcat mare. That's the only thing that gives you hope. But he's Galileo. Galileo ran sixth in the Breeders' Cup Classic. He was a turf horse. He was miles below his turf form when he did run in the Classic. Churchill's a brother to the aforementioned Clemmy, and she's been doing all her winning on turf. It's a turf pedigree through and through. This is an afterthought of a race. The two horses that O'Brien's gone closest with in the Classic on dirt are Giant's Causeway, a Stormcat, and Declaration of War, who was a Warfront. And he hasn't gone close to winning a dirt Classic with a turf horse, and he won't this time. Churchill, big strong horse, coming into it with a bit more to offer, but there's no way he's going to be able to compete with Gunrunner and Arrogate and West Coast and the likes.
Yeah, it's obviously a salty group. Let's loop back. I let some things slide so we could get all of Nick's thoughts in. But I want to go back, if you don't mind, to Friday in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Filly Turf. I think a lot of people are going to be very intrigued that one of the horses you mentioned in here, now you're talking, is a maiden. Maybe offer the perspective. Is that we see it here. We'll see maidens winning stakes races here, but it's relatively rare. Does that give you, as someone who approaches the game from the English perspective, does that give you pause?
Not really, no. Certainly not when it comes to a filly, because I guess they're essentially just chucking this thing into sort of, I don't know, you call it the same in America, but black type races. Races that would improve the sort of value as a broodmare prospect. Of course, a win on the page would, but she's going to get Group 1 placed and what have you. Then I guess that's what they're thinking. I don't know. Maybe they're just in no rush to win their maiden. It's not something that necessarily bothers me. If the horse is it just doesn't bother me at all. If you like her last run, which I did, I'm not saying she's going to go and win on Friday. She might just be one to look at her price. If you like her last run, which I did, off the back of a break, keeping on quite well, and now she's going up in trip and she could quite take to this. It wouldn't bother me at all that she hasn't won a race. It doesn't. She's only had 5 goes in her life, and she's been running against some good horses. So there's plenty of time for her to go and win a maiden if she was to run down the field or something.
One I wanted to specifically talk about a little more also is number 13, Juliet Capulet. Curious to get your views for this John Gosden runner. Is this the only Gosden runner at the
I believe it is.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting.
It is a little bit because he had the horse that finished second in the Racing Post Trophy back in England on Saturday. I can't remember the name of it now, but that looked made for the juvenile turf, and he stayed in England. So I don't know. I'm surprised that didn't come up. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, of course. The angle with this one for me, this Juliette Capulet, is that all her form's on good to soft. It's sort of slow ground, and again, presumably I think she'll be fine on it. But until she goes and runs well on a firm surface, then yeah, I don't know. Her improvement, but she took a little while to come good back in England. I think it was her fourth start or something that she won her first race, and she's progressed with every run. But her improvement coincided with getting slow ground, so that nags at me. Yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit surprising that Gosden doesn't have any more runners, so I don't really know what the thinking is just to bring this one over. Maybe we should take the hint. I don't know. just on the firm turf, she's not for me.
One other point I'll make that makes her an unappealing proposition potentially in the tote pools for this race. I think a lot of USA punters are going to see Gosden, they're going to see Dettori, and she's going to maybe the outside post means there won't be much enthusiasm, but I could see her being single digit instead of double digit odds at the least.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And then and as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to put people away. It's just a view I'm taking. She doesn't excite me, So if you see her at a single figure price, because you see the connections and what have you, I'd be personally looking elsewhere. I might be wrong. She's not what she doesn't excite me. That's all I can say. So I'll be looking to go for something else in that, I think.
General question about these juvenile races. Mm-hmm. I just sort of intuitively prefer to see horses who have some form at least 7 furlongs as opposed to horses who've never been farther than 6. Do you think that matters? Is that something that I'm just reading into?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Off the top of the horse I mentioned earlier, Hootenanny. I haven't got the form in front of me, but I'm sure he was just a sprinter. I can't remember that he ran. I don't go too deep into that in case I'm wrong. I thought he was just basically a sprinter.
No, I think you're right. I don't think he'd gone farther than 6.
Yeah, I just wonder. Yeah, I don't know. Of course, there'll be exceptions, won't there? But I'm gonna. Rightly or wrongly, I'm going to be with the speed types, and hope one of them can stretch out at a price. That's the way I'm going to play it,
makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the decision of Coolmore with Mendelssohn and U.S. Navy flag for a minute. I think this is one where, as bettors and fans, we don't particularly like it. Mm-hmm. Because it doesn't seem logical to us. But from like a breeding point of view, I think that's where a breeder's goals being different than a punter and a fan's goals come into play. I think the idea of taking this relatively green Mendelssohn, the Holder's brother, he runs in the dirt and gets embarrassed. That could have an effect on a really negative effect on his value. U.S. Navy flag doesn't run well, and whatever, they're still back onto the Guineas Trail. I don't think it hurts him from a market.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, a good way to look at it. Yeah, I hadn't really considered that angle. I guess another thing with U.S. Navy flag is because he's got the conditioning of, I think he said 10 runs. It's similar to Johannesburg, isn't it? I mean, the one horse they've had success with in the juvenile, he came into it with a ton of runs and a ton of conditioning, and was he by Hennessy, I think, Johannesburg, so he had that sort of breeding angle. I mean, on the size side, certainly there's hope for US Navy flag as well. So he's got the condition, he's got the sire, but the dam was a turf horse, and I don't know, he could run well US Navy flag. It might be that, it makes sense from the fact that he's battle hardened at least, and it was just a funny race, the Dewhurst, because O'Brien had 4 in it. And US Navy flag was the one that they sent to the front, and one of them missed the break and was sort of taken out the back and wide. Another one, Mendelssohn, was sort of reined back to follow US Navy flag, and another one just never got into it. So basically, they had a fair chunk of the field that day, and with only one of them intending to go to the front, it sort of gave that one a bit of a free pass, and he got a lovely trip, US Navy flag. He went quite hard. I mean, I think the Times suggest that he earned the win, but it was helped that he didn't have anything harrying him, and I did the analysis for our paper that day, the Racing Post, and he was Mendelssohn in behind was sort of quite headstrong, and I was thinking if you'd have switced the rides, in my opinion, to switch the result, if they'd have let Mendelssohn stride on and they'd have held US Navy flag in behind Mendelssohn would have just kept going. So because he kept on right the way to the line despite having been quite keen that day. So I think they're fairly evenly matched, the two horses, and maybe they're just thinking US Navy Flag's the one with all the condition. And the point you touched on, let's not, that they don't want their horse to sort of disgrace itself. Quite an experienced horse after the holder, a lot of eyes would be on it, wouldn't they? Then, maybe that's the way of looking at it. I'm just looking with this Mendelssohn. He's drawn one, isn't he? So, and to me, he looks like a sort of one-paced sort of grinder. So I think they'll make a lot of use of him from there. And yeah, he could run well. He's coming good at the right time, certainly.
Beckford is another horse I wanted to ask you about, the Gordon Elliott runner we touched on quickly before. I thought watching the tape that, especially watching the run at the Curragh, that he just really shaped like a non-stayer. This was, to me, not a horse. I thought he traveled great through the race, looked like winning, and just didn't end up seeing out the trip. But then someone else pointed out, maybe the ground was a factor there. He's supposed to not like it soft. Do you ever see that where a horse will appear to travel over ground they don't like, but just can't finish on it? Or do you feel like it's more indicative of a horse who doesn't want farther when they travel up so well and then just don't finish?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It could be both, and it could be the ground that the horse hasn't been able to go through, or it's a lack of stamina. In the case of this horse, he is by bated breath. It was a really good sprinter. I think he even came over to Woodbine and ran in the Arctic. I think he was a very good horse. So he's a sprint sire. Just reading our comment, our analysis comment that day for the 7 furlong run at the Curragh. The guy who wrote it said, looked well placed 2 furlongs out, but he was well and truly outstayed. So I mean, the guy that was there on the day and wrote the piece. I mean, he was quite strongly of the opinion that the horse didn't stay, and he'd previously won on slow ground over 6 against the horse who then went and beat him over 7. So I mean, but then maybe they think around 2 turns and get him covered up on quick ground. He can cruise along for sort of 6 or 7 furlongs, but you're then relying on him finding a kick that maybe he just won't have. That's the problem.
All right, you've hit on this already in a couple of instances. You mentioned Queen's Trust as one of the European runners you'd be tempted to be against on the day, and you've talked about a few throughout. But are there any other runners, particularly at the lower end of the odds spectrum, who are shipping over, who you don't want any part of throughout any of the races on either of the 2 days?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I suppose. Yeah, I'm not one who would like to take too short a price about anything. So as we touched on, sort of Highland Reel and Ulysses and horses like that, they're coming in, and I'd be against going too short on those. Off the top of my head, Ribchester, for all that I said I wasn't going to dismiss him, if I had to call the race now, I wouldn't be backing him here. The old afterthought sort of thing. So for all that, I don't want to sit on the fence too much and not offer a view, because I'm not saying he can't win. Of course he can, but I'm not going to back him at a short price. I think more to the point, there's nothing that's coming over that makes me think, well, this is coming over and you can take a short price about this because this will just go and win. I think there are enough interesting visitors from Europe at prices. I think as far as if you're looking at the bunch in a sort of general sense, I don't dismiss the ones that maybe have been running on soft turf and all season, and they're coming here for the firm ground and the Lasix, because there could be. I think there's a handful that hopefully I touched on that are ready to. They're going to really step up this weekend because they just haven't had their conditions to this point in recent starts. Definitely,
a lot of our listeners are USA Exotic players, so they have the option of potentially throwing in 4 longer priced horses in a wager without rendering that wager completely inefficiently. And it sounds like, and we've seen this in the past, where it's sort of the quote unquote other European runners are the ones you want to be on at the end of the day. It sounds like you think that approach might be a winning approach once again at the 2017 Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, that's the impression I'm getting. Certainly, that there are plenty of interesting ones that you just got to look beyond a little bit. You've got to just look a little bit beyond their sort of recent form and look why they're here and yeah, I think there seems to be a fair bit of value out there. I think there's some interest. It's a big European squad, and certainly look beyond the. My advice would be to look beyond the obvious, because there are some really interesting ones who are sort of lurking. I think.
We've got just about a minute left, Ron. I want people to get knowledge on where they can hear more from you. Let's start with your Twitter handle.
Yeah, my Twitter handle is Ron _A_Wood, I think. Hopefully, be able to find it. Yeah, and I mean, as far as my sort of job, I work for the Racing Post, have done for many years, and I do horse-by-horse spotlight comment. So my job this week is to basically write a form comment for every horse that's going to be running at the meeting. It'll be then on the Racing Post website, and with a verdict at the end. So I'm going to have my selections for all 13 races. I do that through the year for all the US Grade 1s, and also a few of the plenty of the domestic racing back home. And I also analyse the races. So once they've been run, I'll then try and explain why my selections all got beat. And all the things I said were going to happen didn't happen. I then have to try and make sense of it all. So no, it's all good fun. I love sort of diving into the form side of it, and so it's great. To come to the Breeders' Cup and be writing about these horses. I love it. All I would say, just if I have got any time, I dismissed all the US turf horses in the turf. I do like Sadler's Joy as a horse, and he's got a late kick. So if the race falls apart, he'll be running late. So if there's a domestic horse in the race for me, I'm not going to dismiss it. Sadler's Joy. I just wanted to get that in, just to cover my back.
In the case of a meltdown, he'd be one I could see. I don't necessarily see out finishing either of the ones we talked about before for the win, but certainly one who could work his way up into the number. Those would be conditions he would like for sure. And I agree, he's a talented horse, and when he gets his setup, can do some amazing things. All right, so racingpost.com. Check out Ron's comments. I definitely suggest using Racing Post in conjunction with DRF, especially DRF Formulator. You can pick up a lot of useful notes from Racing Post, and you can embed those right in your daily racing form PPs. I would highly recommend. There's plenty of free info on Racing Post, but I recommend getting a subscription and doing a little bit of a deeper dive for the fine work that Ron and his colleagues do. Ron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it. It's been good fun chatting about all the horses. Hopefully we found one or two winners, maybe.
I hope so. Hopefully we'll get a chance to get together for a cup of tea or a pint out there in Del Mar over the next couple of days.
Yeah, a pint sounds good, I think.
I never know who drinks and who doesn't, but usually if they're English, I can count that they. I probably just should have said a pint.
That's a fair bet. Good. Sounds good to me.
Good stuff. Thanks again, Ron. I also want to thank Nick Luck, of course. I want to thank Jonathan Kinchin, even though he wasn't able to make it. Hopefully by leaving town, he will ensure that we have sunshine and beautiful weather coming up for the next several days. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening to this Halloween edition of the DRF Players podcast. I'll quote one of my broadcasting heroes, John Zackerly, and say, good night, whatever you are. And of course, may you win all your photos.